The storm hit Dustwood like a reckoning. Thunder cracked as a woman staggered barefoot through the mud, her dress torn, her arms clutching a silent baby swaddled in blood. She collapsed at the church door. No one moved, except him. A cowboy stepped out from the shadows, eyes locked on death, and whispered, "She's not dying alone." But when the town finds out who she really is and who's coming for the child, mercy turns into a war line. What would you do if the innocent needed saving, and the whole town said no? Rain lashed the dust from the bones of Dustwood, turning the parched earth into mud and memory. The old church bell, rusted at the edges and cracked down its spine, groaned once then rang, sharp as a rifle crack, slicing the silence of the square. Wind howled through the shutters of shuttered stores. Every door was locked, every light extinguished. Only the storm bore witness to the woman who staggered into view from the edge of darkness. She came barefoot, one arm cradling a bundle tight against her chest, the other dragging a torn shawl over her shoulders. Her dress, once pale blue, clung soaked to her knees, muddied and ripped along one side. Before we reveal what drove a lone cowboy to stand between a child and a gang's blood claim, what truth the church ledger etched in defiance, and how a woman's final whisper turned a whole town toward redemption, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These aren't just stories, they're reckonings wrapped in silence, grit, and grace. Your support helps us unearth more tales where courage speaks without shouting. One click keeps the trail lit. Thank you for standing with us in the dust. Her hair, matted with rain and something darker, stuck to her cheeks like spider silk. Her eyes, wide and feral, searched for sanctuary not from the weather, but from whatever thunder had chased her here before the sky ever split. She reached the church steps and collapsed, not like a body giving up, but like one spent from trying too long to stay upright. The baby in her arms didn't cry, it barely moved. One trembling hand lifted to knock, but there was no need. The great oak door, warped by decades of confession and rot, opened on its own with the wind. She half crawled, half fell across the threshold, and then lay still. Across the square, under the creaking porch of the Last Light Saloon, a figure stood watching broad shoulders under a long duster, hat low against the storm. He'd been there before the first rumble. Hadn't moved when the rain started. Didn't move now, though his jaw tightened beneath the shadow of his brim. Smoke from his cigarette curled and vanished into the wet. He saw the child's blanket, first white, frayed, soaked with red. Then he stepped off the porch. His boots sank in the mud, each step leaving behind a pool that filled with rain as fast as he made it. As he crossed the square, the wind cut sideways, and the lantern above the church door flickered like it might go out. Lightning lit his silhouette in stark relief. Revolver holstered but worn smooth, coat clinging to his frame. The gait of a man who'd buried more than he cared to count. The townsfolk watched from behind shutters, breath caught in their throats. No one else moved. No one ever moved first, not in Dustwood. He knelt beside her, checked her pulse without ceremony. Still alive, barely. The child, pressed to her chest, let out a low, choking gasp like lungs remembering how to be. He peeled back a corner of the blanket, saw the dark bruises across the tiny chest, the way the little hand curled in instinctive fear. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "She's not dying alone." He lifted them both. The baby stirred again, just enough to clutch his coat. The woman's head rolled back against his arm. Thunder cracked above like the heavens were making note. He turned and walked through the church doors. No permission asked, no explanation offered. Only mercy, chosen in the storm. The stagecoach groaned to a halt under a sky choked with dust and waiting. Dustwood didn't get many visitors, and when it did, folks noticed. The moment she stepped down, bare feet, wrapped in worn cloth, a baby bundled tight against her chest, the stillness changed. She kept her head low beneath a sun-bleached bonnet, Her face turned inward like she didn't want the town to see her. Or maybe she didn't want to see the town. The driver didn't linger. He didn't offer to unload luggage, there wasn't any. Just the woman, the baby, and silence. People saw her. They always did, even when pretending not to. Ms. Harlan, setting out stale biscuits on her cafe counter, leaned into the screen door and whispered something sharp behind her hand. The Cooper twins paused mid-sweep at the general store. Broom stilled as eyes narrowed. No one spoke to her directly, but the air bent with questions. She passed the saloon with its doors yawning open to warm liquor and meaner men. She didn't stop. At the church, she paused just long enough to glance at the crooked cross before walking on. Past the sheriff's office, where a figure stood in shadow. Sheriff Dobbs watched with his arms folded, the brim of his hat pulled low. He didn't speak, didn't raise a hand. Just watched her walk by with the slow calculation of a man paid to notice details and trained to pretend he didn't. Behind his eyes, the clockwork-ticked wounds in the fabric of peace always started small. This one carried a child. That made it complicated. So he waited. She turned off Main Street and headed toward the edge of town, where fences outnumbered folks and the prairie wind blew with fewer ears to hear it. There, just beyond the rise, a cowboy crouched at a broken fence line, hands calloused and steady as he tied wire to post. He wore silence like a second skin, the kind of man who preferred wood and wind to words. His coat was slung over a gatepost, sleeves rolled high. The sun painted the back of his neck in raw red. He didn't look up right away, but he'd felt her before he saw her, some sixth sense honed from years of scanning tree lines and reading horses' eyes. When he did glance, it was brief. Enough to take in her staggered steps, the tight clutch of the child, the way she flinched at the crow call from the woods like it was a gunshot. He said nothing. The storm hit harder than anyone expected. It came not as a roll of distant thunder, but as a scream, lightning tearing the sky in half and throwing fire into the heavens. The steeple of the old church cracked like a brittle bone. A jagged bolt struck its peak, lighting it in ghostly silhouette before plunging the town back into black. Shutters slammed, lamps were doused. Dustwood curled inward like a wounded animal. But not him. The cowboy stood just outside the saloon, coat soaked and plastered to his back, watching the street through rain so thick it felt like drowning on your feet. The bell tolled once from the church before falling silent, its iron heart shaken by the strike. Then through the downpour he saw her. She was crawling now, more shadow than woman, her arms wrapped tight around the child like he was the last thing anchoring her to the world. The wind knocked her sideways. She fell to her knees. A final stumble brought her to the chapel door, one hand reaching up to knock, to beg, to surrender. She never made it. Her body slumped forward and the child nearly spilled from her grasp. Inside, candlelight flickered through the stained glass. A moment passed long enough to damn. And then he moved. Boots slammed into mud as he crossed the square in long, steady strides. Townsfolk peeked from behind curtains, some gasping, others simply watching. The saloon's piano man stilled mid-chord. From the church porch, the priest appeared, face pale and lined with age, a lantern trembling in his hand. "Don't," he called over the wind. "You don't know who she is." But the cowboy didn't slow. He bent low and gathered the woman into his arms, cradling the baby with practiced care. The child stirred, letting out a breathy sound somewhere between a cry and a sigh. The woman's lips twitched, but her eyes stayed closed. "She's not dying out here," he said, voice even. The priest stepped back. "This is a house of God, not a refuge for fugitives." The cowboy didn't look at him. He passed through the doorway, boots echoing on the stone, rain dripping in his wake. "Then I will," he said. The door slammed shut behind him. He laid her on the pew closest to the altar, unwrapping the wet blanket from around the child with the care of someone who knew just how fragile life could be. The baby whimpered again, alive, but hungry, scared. He looked around. There was no warmth, no milk, nothing but the flickering light and the smell of smoke from the burning steeple above. The priest hovered at a distance, arms crossed. "They'll come looking, you know, whoever she's running from." The cowboy said nothing. He took a knife from his belt and cut a strip from the cleanest part of her dress to dab at her forehead. There were bruises, some fresh, some old, the kind that told stories no court ever heard. Then, softly, her lips moved. Her voice barely escaped the bruising on her throat. "They'll come for him." The cowboy leaned closer. Her eyes cracked open, bloodshot and full of storms. She wasn't asking for help anymore, she was giving warning. "They won't stop." He stared at her, then at the child. "Neither will I," he said. By dawn, Dustwood was no longer quiet. The storm had passed, but it left behind more than fallen branches and flooded troughs. It left behind questions, whispers, eyes that wouldn't meet. The church stood blackened at the steeple, smoke still curling faint from its crown like incense left burning too long. And behind its doors, sealed now with a beam across the handles, were three souls the town didn't know what to do with. They were talking at the post office by mid-morning. By noon, it was the saloon. By evening, it was the council hall, though no one had formally called a meeting. Ms. Harlan was the loudest. "She's blood to Vargas," she said, slamming a stack of unpaid bills on the table. "I seen the birthmark, same as his. Ain't no mistake." Councilman Greavy leaned in, voice low and hoarse from years of whiskey. "What if she's runnin' from them? And what if she ain't?" spat the mayor, his face red beneath a stiff collar. "We protect our own. That means not harboring trouble with a bounty on its head." A murmur of agreement circled the room, soft but certain. "She ain't one of us," the mayor said again, slower now. "And he's making her ours." No one said the cowboy's name. They didn't have to. Meanwhile, outside the church, boots trampled mud into the gravel. Men leaned on rifles. Mothers kept children indoors. The mob wasn't yet armed, but the air had turned brittle, like wood left too close to fire. The priest stood near the door, eyes sunken, fingers turning his rosary like he was praying for someone else's courage. Inside, the woman slept fitfully. The baby dozed in the cowboy's coat, curled against the warmth of a makeshift fire built from hymnals and broken pew slats. The cowboy sat near the door, one hand on his rifle, the other tracing circles in the dust. Not nervous, just measuring time. The sheriff arrived late. He rode in slow, dismounted in silence, and stared at the crowd for a long minute before pushing through. "You all got homes," he said, not shouting. Just enough steel in his voice to part the noise. "Go tend to him." A few took the chance to back away. Most didn't. He climbed the steps and knocked once. A pause. Then the door creaked open, just enough for eyes to meet through the crack. "I ain't here to drag her out," the sheriff said. "Not yet." The cowboy said nothing. "You know they're scared," the sheriff went on. "They think she brings the gang here." "She brings truth," the cowboy replied, eyes steady. "They just don't like the shape of it." The sheriff exhaled, slow and tired. "You makin' this your stand?" "It ain't a stand," the cowboy said, and began to close the door. "It's a promise." The sheriff caught it with one hand, not to stop him, just to hold it for a second longer. "Just don't let the boy pay for it." A beat passed between them, then the door shut. Outside, the mayor called for a vote. Inside, the child stirred. And somewhere, already, the Vargas gang had heard. The church was dim, lit only by wavering candlelight, and the last embers of a fire that couldn't hold back the cold creeping through the stone walls. Smoke from the ruined steeple above still drifted through the rafters, giving the sanctuary the air of a battlefield chapel, holy but scarred. The baby lay asleep on a cushion of old altar cloths. The woman stirred fitfully nearby, her breathing shallow, her bruises visible even in the amber flicker of flame. Every so often, her hand would twitch toward the child, a mother's instinct that defied pain. The cowboy stood between them and the door, legs planted, arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't slept. He hadn't sat down. He was waiting for the inevitable. It came at dusk. The heavy knock echoed like a gunshot in the silence. He didn't answer right away. Another knock. Then the familiar creak of boots on old floorboards as the sheriff pushed open the doors, the golden light from the setting sun spilling in behind him like judgment. He closed the doors behind him and stood just inside, letting the hush settle between them like a loaded chamber. His hand hovered near his belt, but not over his gun. Not yet. I gave you time, the sheriff said. You gave them time to circle like wolves, the cowboy replied without turning. She's Vargas blood, the sheriff said. That makes the child innocent, the cowboy cut in. The sheriff sighed, stepping further in, voice quieter now. You don't know that. Maybe he grows up with their blood calling. Maybe you're protecting the beginning of something worse. The cowboy turned then, slow, like the church itself might crack under sudden movement. His face was unreadable, stone and fire. And maybe I'm protecting the end of it. The woman stirred, her dry lips whispering something no one caught. Her fingers found the edge of the baby's blanket and gripped it tight. The sheriff took one more step forward. Hand over the child, he said, voice firm but not cruel. And this ends. The cowboy didn't move. And start what? He asked. They stared at each other across the pews in candlelight. Two men tied by history, now pulled apart by something heavier than law. The sheriff's jaw flexed. His hand now rested full on the butt of his pistol, but the draw never came. You were always a good man, the sheriff said. Until you started thinking you were better than the rest of us. No, the cowboy answered, barely above a whisper. I just started thinking they were worth more. He stepped toward the child, knelt, and adjusted the blanket around the baby's small body. Thunder cracked again, rolling over the town like a warning. The candles shivered. The priest somewhere behind them crossed himself and said nothing. The cowboy stood slowly, eyes never leaving the sheriff. What would you do if he was yours? The sheriff didn't answer. He couldn't. Would you defy your town to protect the innocent? For a long moment, neither man moved. The sheriff stood in the doorway, hand resting on the grip of his revolver, eyes locked with the cowboy's. The church was quiet now, even the child asleep in his makeshift cradle of altar cloths. Outside, the crowd had thinned but not vanished. You could feel them out there watching, waiting, sharpening their fear into something sharp enough to cut a conscience. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and judgment. Then the sheriff moved, but not how anyone expected. His hand slipped from his holster and rose slowly, fingers unclasping the tin star pinned to his chest. The badge caught a sliver of candlelight, glinting once before he dropped it onto the dusty stone floor. It hit with a sound that was louder than any gunshot, a flat, metallic truth. The cowboy didn't speak. He didn't need to. This town's forgotten what mercy looks like, the sheriff said, his voice carrying more weight than any decree from the mayor. It ain't in the council. It ain't in the votes they take behind locked doors. And it damn sure ain't in the mob shouting outside a church. The priest exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a week. The sheriff looked down at the woman still unconscious, but clinging to life like it owed her something. Then to the child. Then back to the cowboy. I was sworn to uphold the law, he said. But not every law is worth upholding. He turned to leave, but then the wind changed. It came sharp and sudden, carrying with it the low rumble of hooves on hardened clay. Not just a few, dozens. The kind of rhythm you feel in your ribs before your ears. The priest went pale. The cowboy walked to the doors and cracked them just wide enough to see. Riders. Black coats, leather vests, dust-covered hats pulled low. Some laughing, some silent, guns glinting beneath the twilight. The Vargas gang. They came with no flags, no demands, just smiles and fire in their eyes. The kind of men who didn't announce their reasons because they believed fear was reason enough. They came fast, the sheriff said, stepping beside the cowboy. Didn't think they'd make it before nightfall. They were always close, the cowboy muttered. One of the riders, tall, with a scar down his cheek like a canyon carved by hate, pulled up first. He leaned forward in the saddle and called out, loud enough for the whole town to hear. Hand over the woman and the child. We'll ride out clean, no need for blood. The priest crossed himself again. The cowboy looked to the sheriff, whose badge still lay gleaming on the floor like a question. How many do you count? The sheriff asked. More than us, the cowboy answered. And outside, the town of Dustwood finally realized it hadn't been the woman they should have feared. It was who might come for her. And they were already here. The sun dipped low, casting a rust-colored haze over Dustwood, bleeding light through the clouds like the sky itself had been wounded. The town held its breath behind drawn curtains and bolted doors, watching shadows move beyond the square. The Vargas gang had arrived, and they weren't in any hurry. Horses circled like wolves around the church, their riders toying with the reins, rifles resting easy in their laps. No shots fired yet, but the threat didn't need bullets. It was written in their grins, in the dust rising from their boots, in the casual way they owned the dirt beneath them. Inside the church, the baby began to cry. The woman stirred, eyelids fluttering open like she was surfacing from a deep, cold river. Her voice was a rasp, barely a thread of sound. They came. The cowboy was already lacing his coat. His revolver hung at his hip, but his hand didn't reach for it. He moved with the stillness of someone who'd already decided. The sheriff stood near the door, weapon drawn, but not yet raised. You go out there, they'll take you too, the sheriff said. The cowboy paused. If I stay in here, they burn the place down. The sheriff didn't argue. Some truths didn't need fighting. He stepped through the doorway alone. The wind picked up, tugging at his coat as he stepped into the square. The gang stopped shifting. Eyes turned. Laughter faded to silence. The tall one with the canyon scar smiled wide, teeth yellow and sharp beneath a thick mustache. Well now, the rider said, pushing his horse forward a few paces. Didn't expect you to walk out yourself. Saves us a wall, I reckon. The cowboy didn't answer. The scarred man tipped his head toward the church. We'll be taking the boy. Silence. He's Vargas blood, the man went on. That makes him ours. The cowboy's voice, when it came, was calm and dry as bone. Then he's Vargas no more. That got a reaction, a ripple of laughter from the gang. Riders shifted in their saddles. A few reached casually for rifles, not drawing, just reminding. The lead rider grinned wider. You think that baby gets to choose who he is? I do, the cowboy replied. A pause. A stillness so sharp it made the dust hang mid-air. Then the church doors opened behind him. The priest stepped out, robes clutched in one fist, a small object glinting in the other. His face was pale, but set with something deeper than fear. I have proof, he said. The cowboy stepped aside without turning. The priest raised the object, a silver locket, tarnished but intact. He opened it to reveal a faded photograph on one side, a small carved emblem on the other. The mark of the Dalton family. Not Vargas. She was married, the priest said. To a man who died trying to get her out. This child isn't Vargas. His father was Dalton, and he died protecting that truth. Murmurs broke among the riders. Uncertainty. A fracture forming. The scarred rider's smile faltered, just slightly. The cowboy spoke again, voice like gravel. You came for your blood. You've got none here. The baby's cry carried across the square like a church bell, tolling its own defiance. And for the first time since they rode in, the Vargas gang looked unsure. Night fell heavy over Dustwood, but it did not bring rest. The church sat like a black stone in the heart of the square, scarred and still. Smoke no longer rose from the steeple. The wind had taken the last of it. What remained now were people drawn by torchlight, by whispers, by the weight of things too long ignored. They came slowly at first, stepping from doorways with shoulders hunched, voices low, but they came. Men, women, children, wrapped in cloaks and suspicion, gathering in a rough circle beneath the cracked bell tower. No one had summoned them. But some reckonings don't need invitations. The Vargas gang had gone. Not because they were outgunned, but because something in the air shifted when that locket opened, when blood proved to be a lie, and a man's sacrifice outlived his name. They left without a word, like smoke dispersing after fire. Now the town had to decide what remained in the ashes. The church doors opened slow. Inside, lanterns glowed with a soft golden hush. The cowboy stood near the altar, hands at his sides, steady as ever. The woman sat upright now on the front pew, wrapped in a shawl too thin for the night's chill, her hair damp with sweat and pain, but her eyes clear. The child slept in the crook of her arm, one small fist gripping the fabric of her sleeve. The priest stood behind her, silent, watching. The mayor was the first to speak. "We've had enough trouble for one winter." His voice echoed more from habit than conviction. "She lied about who she was," Ms. Harlan said, folding her arms. "Ran from her family, dragged danger here. That ought to mean something." "Ms. Harlan." The woman stirred. Her voice cracked, unused, but she spoke. "I didn't run from my family," she said. "I ran from what they made me." The crowd hushed. She looked up, straight at the people who judged her with eyes dulled by years of fear. "I was promised to a man who carved scars into children and called it love. The first time I tried to leave, they broke my ribs. The second time, my husband tried to smuggle me out. He died with a rope around his neck, and my name still in his mouth." She held her baby closer. "This boy is his, not theirs. And I came here because I had nowhere else left to go." Silence followed, thick, honest, ugly. Then the cowboy stepped forward. "If the town won't keep him," he said, "I will." No flourish, no appeal. Just the truth spoken aloud. "I'll raise him with my name, with my code. And if that's not enough, then you'll have to tear him from my hands." The mayor opened his mouth, but no words came. Then, without ceremony, the sheriff crossed the square. He walked past the crowd, past the priest, and through the church doors, sat down on the back pew. A moment passed. Then another figure moved. Ms. Harlan. Jaw tight, lips pressed, but walking. She stepped inside and took a seat near the front. One by one, they followed. Not with speeches, not with arguments. They voted with their feet. By the time the last man crossed the threshold, the church was full. No ballots, no debate. Only a quiet kind of justice. And a child still sleeping. Morning broke soft and gold over Dustwood, the kind of morning that didn't ask for forgiveness or offer warning, just light, spilling slow across the rooftops and stretching into the plains beyond. The town had returned to its rhythm. Boots on boardwalks, coffee boiled over wood stoves, chickens scattering dust in the alleys behind the grocers. But it wasn't the same. Some reckonings don't burn down the world, they just rearrange it. At the far edge of town, where barbed wire met open sky, a figure stood beside a split-rail fence. The cowboy's hat sat low against the sun, one hand resting on the top rail, the other holding the tiny legs of a boy perched on his shoulders. The child giggled at the morning breeze, hair wild from wind and sleep. He clutched a small wooden horse carved from the pew of the old church, a toy and a promise both. The cowboy didn't speak much these days. He didn't need to. Not with the boy talking enough for both of them. Nonsense babble 1 minute, curious silence the next. The kind of quiet that comes from safety, not fear. Behind them, the church stood whole again. Scaffolding still clung to its sides where the steeple had been mended, but the smoke scars were gone. Inside, a new page had been turned in the ledger kept beneath the altar. Luke Remington, it read. No middle name, no parentage line, just a place Dustwood and a promise inked beside it in the priest's careful hand. He belongs. The woman no longer slept in the pews. She had a room above Ms. Harlan's cafe now, helped in the kitchen, sang to her child in the early hours when only the wind listened. The bruises had faded. Her voice had returned, steady and warm. She walked through town like someone learning how to live again. And the sheriff? He came that morning before sunrise, riding quiet, not in uniform. No crowd to watch, no deputies trailing behind. He stepped inside the church, nodded to the priest, and placed something in the wooden crib beside the child's blanket. His badge. Worn, smooth, edges dulled by years of service. It sat like a coin, waiting to be spent. I ain't what the law needs anymore, he said quietly. But maybe one day, he will be. He left without another word. Later, the cowboy found it, didn't touch it. Just looked for a long time. Then he picked up the child, slung him gently over his shoulders, and walked out to the fence line to watch the sun rise over the prairie, the way he did every morning. Luke squealed at a hawk overhead, mimicked its cry with a laugh only a child can make. And the cowboy smiled. Not wide, not loud, but enough. Sometimes, blood makes a boy, but love makes a man. But what happens when the boy grows up and the past comes knocking again?